Welcome to Formula One Focus. Hendrik is here to chat to us about all the action from the past weekend's Austin Grand Prix, and what a weekend it was. Quite a few surprises, wasn't there?
Yeah, I think the first surprise was really Ferrari, and Ferrari really showing what they can do. They've had the update, the latest update at Monza, but ever since Monza, it hasn't quite really worked out for them. It didn't quite work out in Baku for them. It didn't work out in Singapore. They showed promise during the course of the weekend, but couldn't quite, use it on race day. But it all came together for them on race day in Austin, and Ferrari won too, the first one in the USA since 2006. So 18 years that they haven't had a 1-2 in the USA. The last one, of course, was at Indianapolis. So great for Ferrari, and now they're very, very close to the second place in the Constructors' Championship. Getting very close there. Let me just see, 8 points behind Red Bull. So Ferrari certainly making the statement that they are in contention for the Constructors' Championship, because they are not that far behind McLaren either. It's only 48 points behind McLaren, who's leading at the moment. So Ferrari certainly now a player in both the championships, maybe not quite as much in the Drivers' Championship, but well, a few more of these Ferrari performances in the next few races, and I think we're in for an absolute stunning highlight. At the end of the climax, at the end of the season.
We'll talk about the big news of the weekend just now, which is the Red Bull McLaren feud that's ongoing or starting to heat up a bit. But just going back to Ferrari, it's there's an old saying that says two dogs fight over a bone, and the third one runs off of it. Ferrari is sort of a dark horse, and all of a sudden we're all looking at Lando and Max and McLaren and Red Bull, and suddenly Ferrari is right back in the running. Number one, they solved their tyre problems. They had no problems with tyre wear or anything. That last year they suffered with that a lot.
Yeah.
And Charles Leclerc seems to have stepped up. Things looking good there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the bouncing or the porpoising that they've been struggling with of late, they clearly also solved that, because this kind of circuit would have shown that up. Yeah, two dogs fighting over a bone. Isn't it fun? It's great, I think. Somebody coming up all of a sudden, not quite unexpectedly, but they are there now,
yeah.
and yes, and so we are really in for a very exciting climax to the season. I think that the two dogs and the bone and the third one taking it was perfectly demonstrated straight after the start of the race at Austin. When Norris started in pole position, he had Max next to him in second place. Norris tried to defend into turn one. He was pushed a little bit wide. In fact, he was pushed very wide by Verstappen, who also just crossed the line, and that opened the door for the two Ferraris to come through. So Leclerc then shot through. Sainz couldn't quite make it, but obviously during the course of the race, and we don't have to go into too many details, but during the course of the race, the strategy that Sainz followed and the easiness with which Ferrari was dealing with the medium tires specifically allowed him to undercut Verstappen for second place later on in the race. So absolutely, two dogs fighting over a bone, and the third one running away. I think Leclerc would probably have won it anyway. He didn't have a good qualifying, so he should have qualified higher. And I think even Norris said afterwards that he had pole position, but he doubted on the weekend and the form that they had and the race pace that they had, whether he would have won the race anyway. He thought that he would have finished third anyway. So and he would have expected Leclerc to win that race. So yes, Ferrari back.
Well, interesting, that last corner accident that George Russell had in qualifying upset quite a few things. Lando said he had the lap of his career, but Max was on track to actually overtake him and score pole. So that was a bit of a lucky pole, if you want to call it that. But let's talk about the weekend as a whole. Firstly, McLaren coming off Singapore on a high. Norris had a convincing victory, 22nd victory. He paced himself towards the end. He got a bit bored. He almost connected to the wall a couple of times, lost concentration. The point is, McLaren was definitely the team to beat. All of a sudden, at the Circuit of the Americas, McLaren was in the back foot, even though they had quite a few upgrades, including a new front suspension and the likes. Red Bull brought some upgrades. Ferrari didn't. Mercedes brought almost a new car. That route, that decision looks like that wasn't a good weekend for them. But then something happened with Red Bull. They were accused of cheating or caught accused of not following rules, whatever the right terminology might be, of the bib. Tell me about a bit about that.
Yeah, it's very technical, Envy, so I'm not going to get too technical about it. But basically, no, they were not caught cheating. It was basically what happened, that the FIA came up a couple of days before the event, came up with an announcement saying that they've been made aware that there's a device on one or more cars that enables them to adjust their ride height from the cockpit while the car is in motion, and they wanted to have a closer look at it. Obviously, if that was the case, that would have been illegal and it would have been cheating. So it turned out that the team in question was Red Bull, but it turned out that it was all a bit of a storm in a teacup, because it was quite clearly explained by the people to the FIA, the people of Red Bull to the people of the FIA, and demonstrated that you cannot do it from the cockpit without another person helping from the outside. The whole idea is to adjust the weight, the ground clearance, so that you can make provision for the fuel weight. And it turns out that this was in the declared technical or declarations made by teams for the last 2 or 3 years already. The rules stipulate that if there are various things that you have to show the FIA, and it has to be open source. In other words, all the other teams must have access to that information as well, that design information. And it turns out that that was the case for this specific device. We're talking about this device, which is at the front end of the floor of the car, basically. It's called the T-tray, and this was called the bib, or the front bib, or whatever. It's part of that T-tray area of the car. The first part of the floor that actually hits the air when the car is going forward. So really, it was a storm in a teacup. It was demonstrated that the car was completely legal. It was also demonstrated that it couldn't be done while the car is in motion from the cockpit by the driver on his own. And it was quite a complicated mechanism that was used in order to be able to do that. And some other teams also had similar devices. So really, I think it was part of the bigger picture where obviously Red Bull has, they've got the target on their backs, and anything that anybody can find that could destabilize them, or to put the pressure or rack up the pressure against them, they will do. And that is exactly what they did, led by a certain Mr. Zak Brown from McLaren, who was very, very outspoken about the whole situation. And again, he didn't quite accuse Red Bull of cheating, but he was very unhappy about that situation. And he demanded a full investigation by the FIA, and he demanded that there should be proof that it was never used in the past. How you can do that, I don't know, because it's not a computer thing with, traces left somewhere. It's a mechanical thing. So you cannot prove unless somebody has taken photographs of them doing it. And it was already demonstrated that it was impossible to be done. So all of that. And I think Toto also jumped into that whole thing. As the weekend progressed, that was a big talking point, and I think that's probably still going to continue, because this battle is hotting up, as they say in America, and at the front now with Ferrari there as well. You can bet your bottom dollar that we're going to find more of this sort of thing. I mean, we saw the situation with McLaren's rear wing, which was also proved to be completely legal. And in fact, they were forced to change it, even though that mechanism on their rear wing was legal, purely because of the opposition and the storm thrown up by the other teams. Part of this whole psychological warfare that is going on, and that is such an integral part of Formula One when the competition is tight. It's actually wonderful to watch, and one should never take it too seriously. These guys get very angry because the stakes are so high. But I think, for us as outside observers, we should just, enjoy the battles that are going on, because certainly much better than the boring kind of situation that we've had for many years.
Yeah, I think back to last year, one race wasn't won by a Red Bull.
Yes.
One out of 23. It was ridiculous.
Yes.
So yeah, and the thing about Formula One, all the action is not only on the racetrack, it's also off the racetrack, all these kind
Yeah.
of politics and that's why we follow it. It makes
Yeah.
it fun. Christian Horner, of course, went on the offense and said, listen, you're accusing me of stuff because you've got something to hide yourself. You've got some skeletons in the closet. Maybe you're trying to, distract attention or,
Yes, exactly.
like you said, several of the teams had to modify the rear wings. It wasn't just only McLaren. So there was quite
Yeah.
a few teams that were not exactly, like you said, maybe in the letter, adhering to the letter of the law, but maybe not to the spirit of the law. And that's why they were forced to change the wings a bit.
Yeah, there's only a spirit of the law when somebody else breaks the spirit of the law. You can do whatever you want to as a team.
True.
Then you say the letter of the law doesn't, or the letter of the law allows me to do this. Forget the spirit of the law. If somebody else, does something that you don't like, and you say, "Oh no, that's against the spirit of the law. It might be legal, but it's against the spirit of the law or the rules or whatever." No, it's all part of this whole game that's being played. And I think we see that on track as well. I think the battle between Verstappen and Norris particularly is part of this bigger picture, and the way that both teams handle each situation is all part of the bigger picture. If the situation is to your advantage, like in this case Verstappen and Red Bull, with that penalty close to the end of the race, then you don't complain about it at all, and you justify exactly what happened on track. If you are McLaren and you came short, you finished fourth instead of third, you say, no, it's unfair and we need to do something about this and whatever. If you were in the same boat, you would have had exactly the same situation. I don't mean you, I mean McLaren.
Yeah.
So,
Which is me.
it's all part of it. It's all part of it. But that's great. I mean, it leaves people something to talk about, and we are talking about it. And that is what you want in Formula One. You don't want to have a sport that is so predictable that nobody talks about it.
Yeah. And nobody watches it anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Just to make that point, we've had so many complaints over so many years about how boring Formula One is, how we want close racing, how we want unpredictability. One of the outcomes of close racing is exactly what we've seen and what we saw over the last weekend, where if you have close racing, you're going to have incidents between drivers. And you're going to have a situation where the one is going to be very unhappy about what has happened with the other one. And that is the reason why there is a document called the guidelines for driving for Formula One drivers. That's not part of the regulations. It's not something that is open to the public or to the media. But there is a set of guidelines that the stewards work from to judge how they should penalize or not penalize any given situation. And that is what we saw over the last weekend.
Well, let's talk about the incidents on the racetrack itself. You mentioned before in the first lap, the first corner, Max did the typical Max thing where he ran wide and then forced the other car off the track. And when Norris eventually overtook him, he did the same thing. He ran wide and forced Norris off the track. So Norris had to go off the track, and he overtook him and he kept the position. And Max was apoplectic about it. He said, "Listen, he overtook me off the racetrack," which is true. You should have given the position back. McLaren advised Norris, "No, it's not true. You were ahead of the apex at the apex. That means the corner was yours, and the fact that Max ran you off the course is to your benefit." Didn't turn out the way. The stewards didn't see it that way. Now let's talk about two things here. The first one, let's get the obvious thing out of the way. Norris was off track. He should have given the position back, regardless of how he ended up off track. Correct?
Absolutely. You can't doubt it. How he got there, that's another question. But yes, he did overtake when he was off the track, and he did not give the position back as the guidelines state. So certainly he deserved a penalty. Normally, a penalty for something like that is a 10-second penalty. And what the stewards said in their decision was, we're not gonna give him a 10-second penalty. We're gonna give him a 5-second penalty because there's extenuating circumstances. And the extenuating circumstances, obviously, were that Max Verstappen had forced him wide and he had nowhere else to go. But yes, he did overtake, and he did overtake off track. So that was indeed penalty worthy.
Well, in that vein now, on the subject now, Max seems to be able to get away with this kind of a thing more than other drivers. And some other drivers were punished this weekend for doing exactly what Max was doing. Yeah. More severely than Max was. You just mentioned I saw some talk about the fact that it should have been a 10-second penalty. Let's assume it was a 10-second penalty, but they gave Max a 5-second penalty. because of the way that he allowed or forced Norris off the track. So it gave a net 5-second penalty. So there was a bit of blame attributed. Why does Max seem to have one set of rules and the other drivers have to follow a different set of rules? Is it maybe the personality, or what do you think
Well,
is nothing to it?
I mean, he's a street fighter, isn't he? He's a street fighter in the same mold as a Michael Schumacher used to be, and an Ayrton Senna used to be. You know, but you push the rules and the guidelines and the practices of the day to its absolute utmost, because you do not allow somebody else to get past you. It doesn't matter whether you're fighting for a win or for a third place, and that is his attitude. There are some other drivers, and I would put Lando in that category, where they grew up in karting, and there were certain again, guidelines or certain practices that they grew up with and said, you know, this is acceptable and this is not acceptable. And when they got to Formula One, and then all of a sudden they are faced with somebody like Max, who pushes the limits in more than one sense, then they get us into a situation where they don't know how to deal with it. Yes, Max has been doing this for quite a while, ever since he's raced, I believe, since he began racing at the age of 4 or something in go-karts, and his father probably told him, you know, this is legal, you can do this, you can push somebody wide. It is acceptable racing practice, one has to say, for somebody who's on the inside of a corner, who's being overtaken on the outside of the corner, to take the normal racing line around that corner. And if the guy on the outside can stay inside the confines of the racetrack while he's overtaking him on the outside, then good for him. If he is then forced off track while the overtaken car on the inside line is taking the normal racing line, if the other guy is then forced to the outside, then he has to back off. He has to concede that corner, and he has to try again. So that is the normal practice. We have seen that many, many times. Somebody is on the inside, he takes the normal racing line, he takes the apex, he goes a little bit wide on the outside, but that's the normal racing line. Somebody else is on the outside, he's pushed off the track, he's run off the track, as Martin Brundle says, and that is normal racing. That's acceptable racing. The key is, however, that the car on the inside has to take the normal racing line in that whole process. And that is what Max is not doing. What Max is doing is he's braking so late that he cannot even, there's no possibility of him of making the normal racing line while he's on the inside and defending his position from the attack by the other driver. So what happened, and that is exactly what happened at that turn 12. Probably the turn 1 also at the beginning of the race, but again, you know, one has to be a little bit more lenient just after the start of the race. We don't want to have the stewards, you know, interfere in close battles at the beginning of the race when you have 3 or 4 cars abreast going into a corner. So that I don't have an issue with. But what Max did was he braked so late while defending his position into that corner that he himself ran wide. That is not the normal racing line. So he himself ran wide in the process, forcing Norris off the line. And earlier in that race, a number of other drivers were penalized for exactly that thing, where they went on the inside. They attacked, in that case, George Russell, and I think Yuki Tsunoda as well, if I'm not mistaken, and ran somebody wide, and they were penalized. Again, 5 seconds for pushing another car off the track. So I think the issue here is that the guidelines that the stewards work with are not sufficient for every single incident, and one should also take that into account. You know, racing is a dynamic exercise. Things change by the fraction of a second, especially you know, in a high-speed situation like that, and in a high-stress situation like that. But if you do have let's say a guideline, these guidelines are not part of the regulations, but they are the basis on which stewards often use these situations. If you then say the guy on the inside, whether he's attacking or defending, has to make the normal racing line in the whole process, and then let the other guy sort himself out, I think that's a better guideline than to say who has, you know, the lead, whose front axle is in front of whose other front axle at the apex of the corner. I mean, you cannot define every apex exactly the same thing. Certain corners have late apexes, certain corners have early apexes. So that to me is not the way to do it. I think, you know, if Formula One can stop trying to over-regulate every situation. Again, they're doing it because of the demand by fans and by the media. You know, Formula One is basically in a situation where if they over-regulate, everybody complains, like I'm complaining now. If they under-regulate, then situations develop, such as, let's say, Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen at Silverstone a couple of years ago, when Max was on the outside and Lewis was getting tired of Max's shenanigans in the whole fight for the title that year in 2021. And Lewis basically said, look, I'm taking this corner. Wherever you end up, that's your problem. And that is exactly what happened. Max then went off and had one of the biggest crashes in his life. A very serious one, it turned out afterwards. So, you know, then you have a situation like that is where people then ask, now, why is there no regulation that governs a situation like that? So, you know, you damned if you do and damned if you don't, if you're Formula One. And again, I'd just like to say that I said earlier on, that is that we only have these situations because we have close racing. And everybody wants close racing. So if you have close racing, you're going to have these situations. You're going to have people in one camp and you're going to have people in the other camp. I'm sure there's a lot of people that don't agree with what I've said about Max, that he had to be penalized as well because he was off the track. And in fact, he was off the track and gained benefit by being off the track by retaining his position, basically. In that process. So, or he could have, because Norris would have had to give him the situation, give him the position back. So if Norris did do that, Max had gone off the track, he would have had the advantage of retaining his position, and that is against the guidelines. So yeah, it's very complicated, and it's sometimes for people who follow one or the other very emotional. I understand that. That is great. That is what sport is all about. But I think one should just, you know, remember all these things while you are evaluating the situation, making up your own mind.
You know what? I always ask myself whether I'm biased or not, in the sense, and I test my theory or my feeling to say, change the two around. If Max was on the outside and Norris was on the inside, would I have felt the same? And I think I would have. That's the thing.
Oh, you would have.
Yeah,
yes, you would have.
The same. I mean, yeah.
Max would certainly not have. He would have complained just like Norris.
Exactly. So that sort of shows the bias. Yeah.
You and I try to be as unbiased as possible. We are journalists. We are trying to just, you know, convey the excitement of the sport and maybe interpret some of the things that may not be quite clear for fans of the sport because we have experience and we've been doing it for a long time. But, you know, let's not forget that drivers and teams do not care one iota for fairness or for good sportsmanship or for spectacular racing. All they want to do is win. Every driver and every team, they want to win, and they want to win by a big margin, and they will do everything possible, legal, that they can in order to attain that. So, you know, one should always remember that as well.
One more thing. The one thing about Max that we do know and that you never doubt and you can't question is the fact that he's mentally incredibly strong. That guy has got big match temperament, call it that. I can think of a bit more descriptive term, but I can't use them. Helmut Marko went on record and said, listen, he doesn't think Lando Norris got the mental strength to be able to compete with Max. And I wonder if there isn't a bit of a grain of truth to that. No? I mean, Lando, like you just said earlier in the conversation, is too much maybe of a nice guy. Backs off when he shouldn't back off. You mentioned that Lewis at one stage said, listen, I've had enough of you now doing this and getting away with it. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do and being allowed to do. What do you think of Norris's, that mental strength side of it, compared, for example, to his teammate Oscar Piastri, which I think has got nerves of steel himself, if you ask me? What do you think?
No, I think that's a good point, bringing up Piastri, and I'll mention that now. But I think, you know, there was a big storm afterwards when Marko made those remarks and talked about Norris's mental health, basically. Does he have the mental health to do it? And I think he just used the wrong words, or maybe it got lost in translation from German into English or whatever. It's got nothing to do with his mental health. It's got to do with his determination, and it's got to do with you know, how hungry he is and how far he is willing to go in order to satisfy that hunger. That is what you want in a top line sportsman. That is exactly what you want. You mentioned big match temperament. That is exactly what you want. That's got nothing to do whether you are weak mentally or not, because, you know, people are far more aware of mental health these days than maybe 20 or 30 years ago. by rights as well. It's because it is a huge problem worldwide. But we're not talking about somebody whether they are mentally healthy or not mentally healthy. We're talking about whether it is a top-line sportsman who is able to compete at the top level as an equal against anybody else, and to be as hard as it takes in order to be successful. That's what we're talking about. And I think you're right. I think Lando is maybe not quite as experienced in this. Well, he's definitely not as experienced as Max to be in a situation to fight for a title. But maybe he's forgotten how he raced when he was in karting and didn't give an inch and won title after title after title. And maybe he'd forgotten what it takes to compete at that level in his mind. So yeah, I mean, Norris, if he carries on like this, let's not forget he came into the weekend with a deficit of 52 points. He left the weekend with a deficit of 57. And you know, somebody worked it out. I didn't, but somebody worked it out that if Lando wins the next 5 races and 2 of the next 3 sprints, and Max finishes 3rd, not even 2nd, but 3rd in all of those races, Max will still be champion. So, you know, it's a huge mountain to climb, and they cannot afford, neither McLaren nor Norris can afford to let this opportunity slip away. They don't know that they're going to have the same opportunity again, ever. Not even speaking about next year, but what happens in 2026 onwards. So if they want to win the championship this year, and of course they want to win it, they have got to, you know, they've got to man up, as they say. You know, man up. You cannot let this man. I'm talking from the point of view of Norris and McLaren. They cannot afford to let this team and this man intimidate them like they're doing at the moment. From a Verstappen's point of view, brilliant. That is exactly what you want. That is what you expect from a world champion driver and a world champion team, who incidentally seems to be, as I mentioned right at the beginning, Red Bull on the verge of losing their 2nd position in the championship, and that opens up the discussion about Perez, Sergio Perez, and Liam Lawson over the last weekend. Because Lawson, I reckon, staked a very, very strong claim to take over from Perez at Red Bull next year, where Perez moved from 9th to 6th, and he was even overtaken by a Mercedes who started from pit lane. Liam Lawson started 19th and finished 9th. Is it?
9th, yeah.
On his comeback, after, you know, being out of the car for 9 months or something.
Yeah, and the circuit he's never driven before. Yeah,
exactly. So you know, that is the situation that Red Bull finds themselves in, and I think you know, if they are going to not win this year's Constructors' Championship, it is purely down to their decision not to replace Sergio Perez earlier this season, probably even this year. They are certainly going to have to do that next year. I see an interesting rumor at the moment. There are plans. That's not a rumor. There are plans to give Yuki Tsunoda a test in the current Red Bull in Abu Dhabi at the end of the season after the final race. So he's still a certainty as an alternative for Perez's seat at Red Bull. Then there's the possibility that Lawson could stay at RB, and that his place as the reserve driver for RB and probably for Red Bull could maybe be filled by Franco Colapinto.
That was my next question.
Yes, because he's another guy who's now staked his claim to be in Formula One next year, and any team who doesn't, you know, give him the opportunity will kick themselves in the near future. So what do you do with Colapinto? Williams is working very hard behind the scenes to get him the 2nd Audi seat, or the 2nd Sauber seat as it is at the moment, for next year. And apparently plan B for him is, if that doesn't happen, try to get him into the Red Bull stable, where he can obviously then use any opportunity that comes his way in both those teams. That gives him at least, you know, 4 opportunities.
Well, I think if you would go for a reserve driver position, Colapinto now, especially in the Red Bull stable with all those, you know, talented drivers included, the Issachar Jar is still hanging around. You know, he's still an option. I think Alex Albon is under a lot of pressure suddenly at Williams, and we know they did exactly the same lap time. Exactly the same lap time with the same car. And Albon is supposed to be one of the most talented drivers. Not supposed to be, he's one of the most talented drivers. And Colapinto, look what he did, where he ended up. You know, he's definitely one for the future. And I can't see somebody letting the opportunity go by. Audi's playing a bit coy, maybe looking for this, looking for that. sign the guy and get it over and done with. I mean, nobody knew him before. I mean, we knew of him, but we never realized how good he actually is. And he's now shown to be one of the
Well, I
most
think
talented drivers.
Well, I think, he's shown in Formula One what he can do. The other guys who are lining up are all juniors. There's no guarantee that if you're a good, even a strong or even an exceptional driver on at the junior level, that you are going to make it similarly in Formula One. We've seen that on a number of occasions. Even Formula Two champions couldn't make it in Formula One. And when they did get the opportunity, it didn't work. So there's no guarantee. So I think he's making a very strong case. He's shown what he can do in a Formula One car in a competitive environment. He's done what Logan Sargent couldn't do in 2 years or 1.5 years with that exact same car. Albon, of course, has a longer term contract. I think if I'm not mistaken, his contract runs until 2026, includes 2026. So I think he's pretty safe. He's not done anything to not deserve that seat. So I don't think Albon is in the firing line at all.
No, he's not. But I mean, he's just in terms of this rookie suddenly out of nowhere, Albon blew Sargent away, like we know, to the extent that Sargent lost his seat, apart from the fact that he crashed regularly. So Colapinto steps in, and he just delivers. And that's the kind of thing that you want to see. And talking about Williams, I saw that there's some more investment that have now been made, $195 million now, more investment into Williams, close to $800 million that Doralton and the venture capital partners have now invested in Williams over the past couple of years. These guys are not playing around. They're serious. They want to make a success of it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why Carlos Sainz has agreed to sign for them. He knows they're not going to be that competitive in the near future, but certainly in the longer term. James Vowles is doing a fantastic job trying to get that team into the 21st century, apparently. Things are looking well. Those guys, Doralton will not have bought their 100 million shares or sold them if they're not sure that team is going places, and that the value of the team. The whole thing is, what you want to do is increase the value of the team. So if the value of the team is only X amount and you invest Y amount, the value of the team jumps up to Z amount. That means that you are going to make the profit of Z minus X. So that's what it's all about.
Accounting 101.
Yeah. So and that's all good news, I think, for Formula One.
Something else, I talked about Cadillac coming into Formula One in 2028, possibly as an engine manufacturer. And I read from a fairly reputable source that it looks like perhaps, you never know. I'm trying to couch it as vaguely as possible, yeah. Cadillac's bought Renault's engine designs and the likes. That should be an interesting development.
Okay, that's new. I didn't know that. Obviously, as you say, it is something that may be floating around. I don't want to dispute that, because it's absolutely possible.
It makes sense.
I'm not sure how far Cadillac had gone with their own Formula One engine, because remember that they were only planning to get into Formula One in 2028. So, they've got sufficient time to start from scratch and have their own one. You buy the intellectual property of the Renault engine, you have already got a head start, and especially if what the people at the engine factory in Paris have been saying, that is that it is silly to close us down, because this engine is looking very, very promising. So from all of those points of view, I think it makes sense for them to do it. Again, it's new to me. I haven't seen or heard this one, but I would not be surprised if they do it, because why would they then spend X amount of dollars to develop their own engine from scratch if they can spend Y amount of dollars to simply buy one that is almost already off the shelf?
Yeah.
So
why reinvent the wheel? Very simple. Yeah.
It makes sense, and I'm certainly, thanks for that. I'm certainly going to look out for that. That would be a very interesting, because that would also have implications for the Andretti global operation as well. I think if they do that, because that means that they could conceivably come in 2026.
Interesting enough. Apparently, Luca De Meijers said Alpine is not for sale, but the way that he couched the words were such that it looks like that maybe Flavio Briatore has been tasked with, like we discussed last time, to get the team into shape and then sell it. And the more he can sell it for, the bigger his cut's going to be. So they're not for sale at the moment. That's going to be very soon, but not at the moment. So if I say it's not for sale, it's not for sale right now. It's not to say
Well,
that
you
it's
know,
not
you
going
must
to be for
always,
sale. Yeah.
one must always be careful when you see these statements made by whoever in Formula One. Normally, it's a senior figure. They would say, there are no talks at the moment about this.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right. There's no talks at the moment. That doesn't mean there's not going to be talks in the future. There are no plans to sell at the moment. Of course, there's no plans to sell at the moment because they want to get more. So that doesn't mean that the team is not for sale. You know, a team principal saying, no, we are not talking to so-and-so at the moment. Obviously, they're not talking to them at the moment. They may not talk to them at the moment. They may talk to them later. They may not talk to them. They may exchange emails.
Mm.
You
Well,
know?
they talked to them last week, but not right now because we're talking on the
They
phone
don't talk
right
to
now.
the, yeah, or they talk to the driver, to the driver's manager, not to the driver themselves. You know, if you say, I'm not talking to X driver, and there are things going on behind the scenes, you're talking to his manager or you're exchanging emails or whatever, you are not lying. You are not lying. You are saying, I'm not talking to him at the moment.
Mm.
You know?
Yeah.
So one should, and this is not trying to be clever or whatever. I mean, I've seen it over many, many years that those things turn out to be that way. So don't see everything. In fact, don't look at most things in Formula One just at its face value. It's most of the cases it's not face value.
So there's something else I wanted to ask you, and I haven't told you before. I just thought about it now. Audi seems to be losing their appetite a little bit. And I see there's some talks about maybe selling that team to a Qatari-based investment group, with Audi retaining the branding rights maybe, or maybe changing it to Porsche or something like that. Audi seems to be a bit lukewarm. Everybody that did the deal to get Audi into Formula One has now left the company. I wonder what the real long-term prospects for Audi as a team is. What do you think? Just an opinion.
Well, at the moment, the prospects are certainly not very good because, as you say, it looks like they're treading water. They're doing all kinds of things that one would not expect a team who's trying to get ready for when they come in as a full works team in 2026. So, yeah, I mean, those rumors that they may be for sale again have been around for a while. And I don't tend to take them seriously until one sees something concrete. They have certainly suffered their own fair share of management problems and letting people go, and people don't see eye to eye. They've got Binotto in there to sort of steady the ship, and he's saying we're taking our time to sign the driver, which leads to all these other rumors that we've been talking about. I would think that signing a driver is probably the least of his problems. You know, as he says correctly, he can wait as long as he wants to because he's got the only seat left basically for next year, and he needs to look at the other priorities. He's not acting as if he's. Let's put it this way: he is acting as if he's looking longer term, and that is what he's doing in public. What is really going on behind the scenes, I'm not going to claim that I know or have any idea. But just keep an eye on that situation.
Right, Hendrik, thank you. It's interesting as always. We could spend another few hours. Just briefly, this weekend, of course, is the Mexican Grand Prix. Yeah. And we'll all be waiting with bated breath. There's a lot of stories floating around that maybe Perez might be announcing an early retirement or something. We'll see at his home Grand Prix. I don't know. What's your thoughts?
Well, as I said earlier on, he's not done himself any favors so far. He had a few strong races at the beginning, and then he had a bad patch in this, the second part of the season. Or after that, and then he had one or two good races, and he was a little bit unlucky to be taken out in where was that? Was it Baku? I think it was. But anyway, when he was
he took himself out, him and Sainz,
yeah. So correct, yes, that's right, him and Sainz. So he was a little bit unlucky there in terms of his results, but he's not covered himself in any glory ever since. Well, again, those rumors that will he announce his retirement in Mexico? I don't think so. I think he's going to wait until he gets fired.
Show him the door. Get a retrenchment package.
And then milk the situation as much as he possibly can afterwards. But that he's not going to drive for that car next year, I think that's probably 95 to 99% certain at this moment. Even
that's
though
that's a big statement, yeah, because he's got a contract for next year. Yeah,
he's got a contract, but the contract is an option.
Yeah, 1+1. You're right. Yeah.
So you know, it doesn't mean that they have to take up the option. And at this point, I cannot see them taking up the option.
He's gone.
There's nothing that would justify them taking up the option unless a huge amount of money is involved. And I don't see Red Bull being that desperate to get Carlos Slim's money and keep an underperforming driver in the process, which costs them a huge amount, of course, in the prize money for their standing eventually, the eventual standing in the Constructors' Championship. So no, I cannot see that happening.
Something else that was floating around is Mark Webber, Oscar Piastri's agent, maybe knocking slightly on the door of Red Bull. I'll be very upset if McLaren loses Oscar.
No, look, I mean, Piastri is very happy at McLaren. I think he knows that next year is going to be easier.
Yeah,
if McLaren is as competitive as it is this year, we touched on it a little bit earlier on. I don't think Piastri would have been so, let's call it soft, against Max as Lando has been. Certainly would not have been so soft in terms of his competitiveness or his willingness to go wheel to wheel against him. Interestingly, also, just on a similar note, Liam Lawson getting into a bit of a tiff with Fernando Alonso.
Yeah.
In his first race coming back, and Christian Horner hit the nail on the head, saying afterwards that if you have a tiff with Fernando Alonso on your comeback, you are doing something right, which is exactly right. So, yeah, I think guys like Piastri and Lawson, they have got that. Again, I don't want to talk about their mental health, but they've got the drive and the hunger, I think, to not be as intimidated by somebody like Max as Lando has. I hope Lando shows I'm wrong, but at this point I cannot see that.
No, I agree with you. And I think next year when they start from scratch and Oscar is going to go for it. Remember, it's only Oscar's second year in Formula One.
Yes.
Next year, starting from scratch with a proper car where he doesn't have to accede to Lando or anybody else, he's going to go for it. I think it's going to be a very close, very interesting year next year. And I think Oscar's definitely the man to keep an eye on. I will certainly do that, yes.
Absolutely. That is obviously assuming that McLaren will be as competitive as they are now, which I think they will. I think they will.
So too. All right, Hendrik, thanks, man. Appreciate it. We'll talk again next week.
Talk to you then.